The strange thing about people who never seem to run out of things to say is that they are often not the most talkative people in the room. They are not performing harder. They are not racing to sound clever. In many cases, they are simply paying better attention. And that changes everything because most conversations do not die from a lack of words. They die from too much self-consciousness. So before we ask how to keep a conversation alive, we have to ask what makes it collapse in the first place. There's a feeling many people know far too well. Before meeting someone, your mind seems full of possible things to say. You imagine a smooth opening line, a few decent stories, maybe even a version of yourself that feels relaxed, interesting, easy to talk to. But then the conversation actually begins, and something shifts. The words that felt available a moment ago seem to scatter. What remains is pressure. Pressure to say something quickly. Pressure to prevent the pause from becoming awkward. Pressure to prove that you are not dull, not stiff, not forgettable. And from that moment, the conversation often starts to dry out from the inside. Most people assume the problem is that they are not naturally good at talking. They think they need more charisma, more stories, more speed, more charm. They treat conversation as a subtle kind of performance, a place where the person who sounds the most engaging wins, so they enter it carrying a silent burden. I need to be interesting. I need to keep the energy going. I need to make sure this does not become uncomfortable. I need to give them a reason to enjoy being here with me. But the harder you try to manage all of that at once, the less present you become. Because when you enter a conversation trying to perform well, a large part of your attention turns away from the other person and back towards yourself. You start monitoring your own face, your own tone, your own timing. Was that too much? Was that too flat? Do they look bored? Should I change the subject? Am I coming across badly? Instead of being inside the exchange, you stand just outside it, watching yourself inside it. You speak and judge yourself at the same time. You listen and defend yourself at the same time. You want to connect, yet you are also trying to protect your image from every small risk. And when your attention is split like that, the natural flow of language begins to thin. What feels like having nothing to say is often something else entirely. It is not emptiness, it is overload. Too many thoughts, but most of them circling around how you are being perceived. That is why some conversations can leave you strangely exhausted, even when nothing dramatic happened. A short reply from the other person can unsettle you. A few seconds of quiet can feel enormous. The more desperately you try to keep the interaction alive, the more tension you bring into it, and that tension quietly suffocates the very thing you are trying to protect. You can see this clearly in ordinary moments. Someone mentions a recent trip, and instead of becoming curious about what stayed with them, what surprised them, what changed in them, you give a polite reaction and immediately search your own mind for the next safe topic. Someone brings up work, family, a small routine, a passing frustration, a hobby that matters to them more than they expected. Each of those details is a doorway, but because you are busy preparing your next line, you do not walk through any of them. The conversation stays on the surface, moving just enough to continue, but never enough to deepen. This is why so many exchanges feel thin, even when there was plenty to work with. The issue is rarely that there was no topic. The issue is that curiosity never really arrived. People are often told that good communication comes from learning how to speak well. But if you want to stop running out of things to say, the more important skill may be learning how to ask. Not asking mechanically, not asking to fill space, but asking with intention, in a way that opens the other person rather than merely extending the clock. There's a difference between reacting to what someone said and entering it. If someone says, "I've been busy lately," you can nod and let it die there. Or you can ask, "What has been taking most out of you?" If someone says, "I moved recently," you can answer politely and move on. Or you can ask, "What has been the hardest thing to settle into?" If someone says, "I like walking on my own," you can hear it as a passing fact. Or you can ask, "Is it the quiet you like, or the way your thoughts begin to clear when no one is around?" A good question does more than keep a conversation going. It tells the other person that you are not just collecting their words, you are trying to see the shape behind them. And when people feel that, they usually begin to give more detail, more feeling, more honesty, more of themselves. At that point, you are no longer dragging the conversation forward by force. It starts moving because something real has been opened. But to ask well, there is something even more important than the question itself. You have to listen properly. This is where many conversations quietly fail. People hear the words, but they do not really receive them. They wait for their turn. They search for something familiar enough to relate back to themselves. They prepare their next answer, while the other person is still revealing the current one. From the outside, they look engaged. They nod, smile, respond on time. But inwardly, they have already left. They are not listening to understand. They are listening to reply. And when you listen like that, you miss the richest parts. The slight hesitation when someone mentions home. The small change in their face when work comes up. The way their energy lifts when they talk about a place, a memory, a person, a habit, a tiny obsession that matters more than they first let on. Those details are not decorative. They are the emotional architecture of the conversation. If you listen deeply enough, there is almost always something to follow, something to ask, something to recognize, something to stay with a little longer. That is why the most compelling people in conversation are not always the ones saying the most. Often they are the ones who make you want to say more. Around them, you do not feel rushed into performance. You feel there is room to open, and that feeling does not come from technique alone. It comes from the quality of their presence. Once you begin listening properly, another truth becomes easier to see. Human beings connect fastest through common ground, not through grand speeches, but through small recognitions. A similar experience, a familiar tiredness, a shared value, a strange little habit, a kind of day both of you understand without needing to explain much. Common ground is rarely dramatic when it first appears. It is often just a faint signal, but if you notice it and stay with it, that faint signal can become a bridge. This is why people who are good at conversation do not chase impressive topics as often as others imagine. They pay attention to points of contact. They notice where the other person brightens, where they soften, where they become careful, where something in them leans forward. And from there, the exchange stops feeling like two people taking turns to produce words. It becomes two inner worlds, testing where they overlap. Once that overlap begins to form, the fear of running out of things to say often weakens on its own, because now the conversation is no longer being carried by your effort alone. Both people are helping to hold it. There is, however, one thing that still frightens many people more than it should: silence. A brief pause can feel unbearable when you are already anxious about how you are coming across. You interpret it as failure, as proof that the interaction has slipped, as evidence that you are not enough to sustain it. But not every pause is a problem. Some pauses happen because someone is thinking. Some happen because a question landed somewhere real. Some are simply the natural breathing space between two people who are still finding each other. When you stop panicking at every gap, you also stop filling space out of fear. And that changes the texture of what you say. Your words become less rushed, less defensive, less eager to rescue the moment at any cost. You begin to understand that a good conversation does not need to run without interruption. It only needs to remain alive. Alive with attention, alive with honesty, alive with the sense that both people are still here. And that is where the shift happens. If you never want to keep feeling as though you are about to run dry, do not begin by forcing yourself to become more dazzling. Begin by moving the center of gravity from "what do I need to say so they like me?" to "what is this person quietly showing me?" From "how am I doing?" to "what in their answer deserves another step?" From "how do I seem interesting?" to "how do I make it easier for them to feel seen?" You can practice that in very small ways. When someone answers you, do not rush to replace their answer with your own story. Stay with it for a moment. Ask yourself what detail carries emotion. What detail most people would glide past? What detail might open a deeper layer if handled gently? Try offering one follow-up before offering your opinion. Try finishing your listening before reaching for your response. Try remaining with a small detail for a few more seconds than you normally would. Sometimes an entire human being begins to appear through one overlooked detail, and it helps to remember this as well. Conversation is not an exam. Not every interaction has to be profound. Not every person will match your rhythm. Not every moment of hesitation means something has gone wrong. Some exchanges will remain brief. Some will stay light. Some will never quite open. That is part of being human. But when you stop treating each conversation like a test of your worth, you become less tense. And when you are less tense, you listen better. You ask better. You notice more. And almost without realizing it, you also have more to say. In the end, what makes someone memorable in conversation is rarely a perfectly delivered line. What lasts is usually a feeling. Did I feel rushed with them? Did I feel judged? Did I feel I had to edit myself too much? Or did I feel that what I said actually landed somewhere? Did I feel that someone was truly there with me? That is the real secret behind never running out of things to say. It is not about discovering an endless supply of topics. It is about stepping out of the role of performer and returning to the role of participant. You stop asking how to impress. You start asking how to understand. And once genuine interest becomes the center of the exchange, words do not disappear. They simply become calmer, deeper, more precise, more alive. So if you have been feeling clumsy in conversation lately, do not be too quick to conclude that you are boring or bad at connecting. It may be that you have simply been carrying too much pressure to be impressive. Try easing your grip. Ask a little more slowly, listen a little more fully, stay a little longer with what the other person has just revealed. You may find that many conversations do not need to be saved by brilliance. They only need to be nourished by sincere attention. And perhaps that is why the moment you stop trying so hard to shine in front of someone else is often the moment you finally begin to reach them. If this way of seeing the inner life of conversation speaks to you, stay with Mind Psypher, where understanding other people is sometimes the quietest way of returning to yourself.